Hello, hello, stepmamacitas. ¿Cómo están? How are you? I hope you all are doing well, enjoying this beautiful month of May. Summer's right around the corner. But more importantly, Mayo es el mes de las madres. It's the month. Oh, it's also Mental Health Month. But more than that, it is the month that we celebrate all mothers. And so, in the spirit of La Madrastra podcast, I do want to give a big shout out to all you stepmamacitas who may not always get celebrated El Dia de las Madres, but you know that you play such an important role as a maternal figure in your home, being a provider, being a teacher, somebody that provides care, nurture, that handles business, takes care of important tasks in the home. I see you. I recognize that. And my hope is that your loved ones, your community also celebrate all of you um, this past year and all of the years to come. Now, this time of year can actually make us feel a little bit unseen. Now, whether we have children or not, when it comes to our stepchildren, we are very aware that they have their own biological mother. Our stepchildren have two mamas. They get a wonderful step bonus mama. And so, but at the same time, even though we may choose to take on all of the duties of a mother, to provide all of the love and warmth and care and apapachos that a mother would, this day marks the moment where we may not always be recognized as that. And, for those of us that don't care about labels, that don't want to lock something down, put it in a box or put it in a category, it might seem like, ¿qué tiene? Who cares? No me dice mother. They don't wish me a happy Mother's Day. I still know who I am. Yes, that's true. But I think it's also important to recognize the importance of words and to recognize that depending on how we talk to somebody or how we call them, it could make them feel a way. It could make them feel included. It could make them feel excluded. It could make them feel seen, or it could make them feel not valued. And so, in today's episode se llama What is in a Name? We are going to talk about labels, names, titles, and why these things matter. Why it's important to recognize these words, but also to understand what kind of an impact does that have on us? What does it create inside of us? Does it stir any feelings or emotions? Or are we completely detached from these words and labels? First, before we move forward, I do want to take a moment to recognize this past Mother's Day, all of the mamacitas that actually did not get to spend time with their children. I think this is something in society that's really important, that we recognize that the current political climate is causing such pain in the mother community. And so, whether it's moms that they themselves are in detention centers, their children are in detention centers, maybe moms or children that have been deported and families have been separated, and these children cannot be by the side of their mother, think this is a really painful moment. Um, but to not stay US centric, also thinking around the world and how there are so many mothers this year that will not be with their children due to wars or genocide. And so I do want to, I would want for all of us to hold these mothers in prayer, to hold them in our hearts, because for us, yes, as Mexicanas, as Latinas, we celebrate Mother's Day on May 10th, which might not be the same around the world. However, I think there's a little part of us that has that awareness of other mothers around the world, and that in a way, we ourselves, whether we are in these situations or not, we still are grieving with other mothers. Also, I wanted to announce that one of our former guests, Daisy from Reiki by Daisy, has generously and graciously offered to provide a free Reiki session to one of our listeners. Now, if you are either wondering about Reiki or if you already know, like, that's for me, I really want a Reiki session, please send me a DM on Instagram. My info is always in the description, but send me a DM and I will go ahead and I will forward your information to Daisy and she will be reaching out. So you can submit your name for the free session. Or if you're interested in receiving Reiki, whether it's free or not, or you want to do an energetic exchange, you can always send me the message and I could forward your information to Daisy. So let me know if you're interested. And let's go ahead and get started with today's episode. What is in a name? Why names, labels, and titles matter. Vámonos. When I first became a stepmom, I remember I was at this work event. I was taking a tour. Actually, I was taking a tour with some members from like the custodian team. And I started chatting it up with one of my coworkers, this elderly man who was about to retire. Felicidades, señor. And we got into the topic of family, children. I started telling him about my stepdaughter, and I called her my stepdaughter. And immediately, as if it were a knee-jerk reaction, he said, "Don't call her stepdaughter. That's your daughter." When he said that, I was like, "No, hombre, señor, pues qué mandón," you know? I was like, that's a little bossy, but I felt an inner conflict. First, there's a part of me that wants to give her mom her place. I understand that I did not birth this baby girl, and that in and of itself demands recognition, acknowledgement. But on top of that, obviously, biologically, she's not my daughter. And the thing is that my stepdaughter doesn't call me mom. And so how weird would that be for me to be like, hija, 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 hija this, hija that. And then for her, just be like, no, that's my stepmom. And so that inner conflict that I felt in that moment had a lot to do with that contradiction. The same contradiction that I talked about in the intro, which is, am I a mom? Am I not? Am I just a stepmom? Am I that maternal figure? And am I recognizing myself as that maternal figure? Or is it kind of floating around in my mind that I may not really be that? So that was part of that back and forth that I felt in that moment. But also wanting to respect my stepdaughter and how she referred to me. So if she did not give me that title of mom, it would be contradictory for me to give her the title of daughter. I was thinking about that. I was contemplating. It was marinating all in my head. And he proceeded to tell me a story about his son. It was actually his stepson who he raised desde que estaba chiquito. But this person was telling me about how important it was for his son to be called son, for there to not be a distinction between biological children and stepchildren, but rather to feel like they are fully part of a family, that even though the family might be blended, how important it is for us to recognize children as our children. They are a part of the family, and we have the power to help them not feel excluded or make them feel like they're an outsider or as if they don't belong. And I thought about that. After that conversation, there was other people that I would come across and they would say something very similar, talking about the importance of not making that distinction. Now, as our podcast is called, se llama La Madrastra. Y a poco no? La Madrastra sounds a little like, it doesn't roll off the tongue easy. And it's just kind of abrasive. Well, the name for stepdaughter in Spanish is also kind of abrasive. It's hijastra, like madrastra, hijastra. And it just sounds like you're angry. Maybe, I don't know. It's not the smoothest. It's not the warmest word. And so I think there's something to be said about that as well. of using these other words that are more endearing, that are more embracing, and that don't sound so like puchilala, you know? So I started to consider calling my stepdaughter my daughter. And I wanted to experiment with it a little bit. So I wanted to see what it would feel like. Was it going to be awkward? Kind of like when you start dating someone and you start calling them babe. It sounds so weird. Or like baby, like, hey, baby. So there's all these pet names and terms that sometimes it might feel funky. So I wanted to play around with calling her daughter. And I actually didn't prep her. I didn't ask her what her thoughts were because I already knew that she had me defined as her stepmom. And so I was like, let me see how she reacts. And sure enough, the first time I called her daughter, it's like, oh yeah, it's mi hija. I could tell that she was like, huh? But it wasn't a negative reaction. It wasn't something where she was like, oh, hell no. It was just something where she hadn't heard it and I don't think she expected it. And so when I said that in that moment, I think it made it okay for us to recognize our connection, for us to recognize that we are family, even if we are step family, stepmom, stepdaughter, that we can still relate to each other, we can still be connected, and that it's okay. And to a certain extent, one of the things that this elderly man had mentioned, but also that other people had also mentioned, is that sometimes when you use that word hijastra or stepdaughter, it's almost as if it's drawing a boundary. It's almost as if it's saying, wait, hold up, stop right there. We are not like full blood. And this recognition of that division can sometimes be detrimental to the relationship. Now, that in and of itself is very unique to the relationship that you may have with your stepchild, but it's worth considering. When I first met my stepdaughter, I didn't know what kind of relationship I was going to have with her. Initially, you know, she was so cute, estaba bien chiquita, bien bonita, and I had a habit of calling children mijo or mija. When I was studying to become a teacher, I remember my supervisor, he would tell me teachers are like a second parent because we're with them for most of the day. We see them almost every single day. Now, obviously, they get to go home with their real parents, with their family, but we can have a big influence on them. And on top of that, one of the ideas that was floating around in my mind was remembering how my dad used to ask me, uh, claro, cuando me portaba mal, but he would be like, ¿y eso? ¿Qué no aprendiste en la escuela? And he would allude to teachers presenting information, giving lessons on life skills, on manners, on etiquette, and things like that, which obviously for us, that was not in the California educational standards. But it was something that my dad valued. And so considering that, and also considering what my fieldwork supervisor would tell me, I wanted my students to feel like they did have a positive adult figure, maybe not like full on mom or dad, not full on parental figure, but that they did have a responsible adult in the room who was going to teach them not just content, sino que también life skills, manners, respect, and things like that. It was really important to teach students how to navigate life. And so obviously that went far beyond history lessons. I wanted them to learn how to talk to each other, how to be professional, and how to succeed. And so when my students would come to my class, I would often call them mijo or mija. Now, I know that today there's awareness about our transgender students. And so I had originally started calling my students mijo or mija 20 years ago. I didn't know any better. But one of the things that I did notice is that when they came into the classroom, they felt comfortable. They felt safe. And so, as you can imagine, after 20 years of working in education, pues, mijo and mija just rolled off my tongue like nothing, you know? And so when I met my stepdaughter, even though my husband and I hadn't formalized a relationship or anything like that, this term just came very natural to me. So I did start referring to her as mija. Whenever I needed to call her attention to something, I would say, "Oh, mija, ven," or "Oh, ¿quieres un panecito, mija? ¿Quieres una dona?" So I would offer things to her and call her mija, mija this, mija that. And I think she recognized that. And although I wasn't calling her my daughter, there was still something about being called mija that helped her to understand that this would be a loving home, that this would be a loving relationship. Now, ¿a poco no? A ustedes también, mamacitas, díganme si sí o si no. When a vato calls you mija, it feels nice. It always feels great because it does signal care. This is something that is a part of our culture that allows us to feel loved, to feel included. And in using that with my stepdaughter, although it was as if I was talking to another student, I think in her mind, she also realized that she wasn't just her father's daughter, sino que también la mía, also mine. Now, for me, I don't have children. I'm a childless stepmom, but I still feel connected to motherhood. I feel like a mom, and I don't feel like I need to have children to feel like a mom. This year for Mother's Day, there was all kind of memes, all kind of carousels up online. And it was very beautiful and very validating to see how folks had put some of this content together, recognizing different kind of moms. So for example, I'm a cat mom. I have 2 cats. I love them so much. They're like my babies. But I also didn't pop them out. So, in a way, it's like kind of yeah, kind of no. With my students, I kind of felt like their mom a little bit. Obviously, I didn't have to pay bills. I didn't have to regañarlos. I didn't have to cook them dinner. However, I felt like a maternal figure because I opened up communication with them. I wanted to teach them things. I wanted to empower them. I wanted them to learn life skills. And so, in a way, it was kind of like I was a mom to them too. And finally, with my younger siblings. In the last episode, I talked about being a parentified child, and I absolutely would feel like a second mom to them. I was old enough to. So the middle brother le ganó con 7 años. I'm 7 years older than him. And my baby brother, I'm 9 years older than him. So, when I was already taking care of them, I was already 11, 12, 13, and they were still very little. I was invested in teaching them about the world, in teaching them about mainstream culture, ya que as a daughter of immigrants, I felt a little disoriented sometimes or disconnected, and I didn't want them to feel that way. And I think that in and of itself is part of the essence of motherhood. It's the selflessness. It's wanting to give to children. It's wanting to protect children, to take care of their needs, and to set them up for success. And so even though I don't have my own children, I do still feel tapped into that kind of energy. And for those of you stepmamacitas that are out there that perhaps don't have children, but are going out of your way to take care of your stepchild or your stepchildren, I believe that right there is part of the essence of motherhood. Part of the essence of motherhood, I also believe, is in learning the lessons from children, having them reflect certain things back to you, the type of person that you are, what kind of parent are you, how do you react, how do you show your emotions, how do you now reflect on, well, wow, like when I was a kid, I thought this, and now that I have a kid, or now that I'm responsible for a kid, I'm on the other side. So there's all kind of different learnings and wisdom that come from taking care of a child. And so that, I think, is another part of motherhood that for us stepmamacitas, even though we may not have birthed a child, we still have that experience of reflecting on our lives, reflecting on how we're currently being in life, and also decide if we want to make some changes, if we want to continue, maybe improve on our practice as parents, and things like that. And I think there's a big opportunity for healing our own inner child as we are having this experience with our stepchildren. As someone who is learning these lessons, as someone who is finding herself trying to be selfless, trying to be mindful and considerate for this other little human being, and also being hopeful about their potential, being very curious about what their lives are going to be like. Who are they going to grow up to be? And so I think it's safe to say that I'm pretty damn invested. And I, another characteristic of motherhood, wanting the best for these kiddos, being excited about their future, and just hoping that we can contribute to it. I've always wanted to have children. No se me ha hecho. It hasn't been in the cards up until now. I'm getting up there in age, but I'm still open to it. Quien sabe? I already know who my doula and my midwife are going to be, by the way. But that's me getting ahead of myself. But I have always wanted kids. Matter of fact, I remember when I was 3 years old, I was trying to lock it down and trying to figure out like, oh, how am I going to do this? How am I going to start a family at 3? So as a result, I've always wanted my stepchild to call me mom or mommy, but I have never asked her to do that, and neither has dad. And I think that's really important because yo quiero que le nazca. If she ever says that, I want it to come naturally from her. I don't want her to feel pressured. I want to respect the labels that she wants to call me by, what she feels comfortable with. So for the longest, she's called me by my first name. Que Rosalba this, Rosalba that. She writes me love notes that say, Dear Rosalba. And to be honest, I'm okay with that. I don't have an issue with that. And as much as I would love to be somebody's mom, I think it's more about the connection. I think it's more about the comfort, and I also think it's about honoring the voice of that child, honoring their wants and needs, and, however they feel comfortable in talking to you. Then for us as adults, we can make it safe for them to call us what they feel most comfortable with. The first time that I picked up my stepdaughter from daycare, estaba chiquitita. She was 3 years old. One of her little classmates came up and she said, "Oh, is that your mom?" Very clearly, with no hesitation, she turned around and said, "No, that's my stepmom." And she said it with so much authority and confidence. I was shocked. And I love how my stepdaughter is very comfortable with setting boundaries. And part of that is with names and titles. For her, I think it's important that she recognizes her mom. And to be completely honest, I don't think her mom is okay with her calling me mommy or mom. And I think she might actually get in trouble if she does that. And so there's a part of me that, aside from respecting how my stepdaughter wants to refer to me, there's also a part of me that I don't want to get her in trouble. I don't want her to face any negative repercussions for wanting to give me that title. So just considering that that's going on in the background, I also, it helps me to check myself and any feelings that I may have around being called mom. Now, in danza, this is another area where people are shocked to find out that she's not my biological daughter. When I first brought my daughter to danza, she doesn't know the steps. And I could tell that she would feel a little lost and a little uncomfortable. Learning in and of itself is a very vulnerable process porque you are showing that you don't know, that you can make mistakes, that you may not be fast enough. And so a lot of insecurities can come up in a learning environment. So in danza, as she was learning danza, it was really important that she found an anchor, that she found somebody who she could be tethered to for support. That if she felt embarrassed or if she felt a little silly, that she could turn around and somebody would be like, hey, it's okay. As we would dance, sometimes, we go to the right, we go to the left, we turn 4 times, we turn 8 times, we do counts of 4 and 8 and all kind of different things that are involved with choreography. And in order for her to not feel lost, I would hold her hand. And so in this particular case with her, again, just like with my students, I wanted her to feel supported. I didn't want her to feel embarrassed or ashamed, but I wanted her to feel empowered. And so there we were dancing. And we, to this day, sometimes we still hold hands, or I will be very explicit about the movements because I want her to understand the choreography. And people see that. People around us see that. And even there, they'd ask, oh, yeah, qué bonita te ves con tu mami or something like that. And they would allude to me as mommy. And right away, she'd be like, oh, no, that's my stepmom. I've actually noticed her change a little bit. And so now she won't push back as hard as she used to. Be like, no, that's my stepmommy. No, that's my stepmom. So she doesn't do that as much anymore. And I think she's starting to grow a little bit comfortable with the term. Now, again, I do not push her. I want her to call me whatever she feels comfortable and safe calling me. And another aspect of this is also respecting her own biological mom. So aside from giving her her place, right? I also think it's really important when it comes to names, titles, labels, and all of that to honor and respect how my daughter wants to call me, but also to understand that I do not want to feed any kind of parental alienation. So with parental alienation, this has to do with a biological parent kind of pitting a child against the other parent. This could be out of insecurity because they feel threatened. And so when it comes to labels, this is also something that could come into play. One example of that is that the biological mom will tell the stepchild that they can or cannot call their stepparent mommy or papi. Or maybe even like, oh, okay, well, you can call my husband papi, but you can't call your stepmom mommy. And making that differentiation, making that distinction can be really harmful for children. A child, in my opinion, should feel free to display their affection, to show love, whether it's to a biological parent or to a step parent or to their siblings or step siblings or whatnot. And so I always think that parent alienation is something that a lot of step parents have to deal with because we may not be experiencing it ourselves, but we may see how it's impacting our partner. And so as we are experiencing stepmotherhood, we can also experience the hurt and pain that the other biological parent could be inflicting on your partner. And so for us as stepmamacitas, when it comes to names, labels, and titles, we should feel secure enough within ourselves that not only do we not need to talk smack about the biological mother, but also that we are able to hold space for our children so that they could express themselves and not feel judged, not feel shamed for being a child of the biological parent or anything like that. In my clinical counseling program, one of my professors would talk about the importance of referring to biological parents with respect in blended families. And part of that is because, children see themselves, they are very aware that they are the product of that biological parent. They come from that biological parent. And a lot of times when a biological parent is flawed or makes a mistake or something like that, that child will internalize it. They'll personalize it and even ask themselves like, oh, am I that way? So for us as stepmamacitas, we also have to be aware of that. And we have to be aware of how we refer to the biological mother or father or whatever it is. And that we don't do it in a way where our stepchild feels shame. If we're out here saying, "Oh, that bitch," all the time, obviously, if your stepchild hears that, they're not going to feel great, and it could actually be very detrimental to your relationship with them. So, all of that being considered, and in thinking about El Día de las Madres, ¿cómo les fue? Thinking about, uh, did they celebrate you? Did they not celebrate you? How did you feel? Did you get some flowers this year? Were your stepchildren willing to acknowledge you as their mother? That, and also considering the labels by which our stepchildren call us. Sometimes we might feel a little sentida. And so let's talk about feeling sentida. First of all, for those of you that may not be familiar with the term, sentida is when you're hurt. Depending on what names, what titles or labels we are using in the home, does that lead us to feel sentidas? Do we feel like we are being given our place? Do we feel acknowledged, seen, and valued? Or do we feel like we're kind of off to the side, a little excluded, like an outsider? In the moments when you feel like an outsider, or you feel excluded, or you don't feel like you're a part of the family unit, maybe you're not celebrated for Dia de las Madres, or maybe your stepchildren refuse to call you mom or even stepmom. Sometimes these could bring up some heavy emotions. It can make us feel hurt. It can make us feel discarded, dismissed, things like that. And so what do we do with those feelings? First, I think it's really important to identify, what is it that you're feeling? What's going on? What are some of the thoughts that are coming up? Maybe you are having thoughts of feeling disconnected, feeling detached, feeling like an outsider, feeling lonely, feeling angry, rejected, betrayed, sad, worthless even. So first, I think the first step to addressing this is to actually name it, to identify it, to call it for what it is, to sit with it and become aware of what are all of the thoughts and feelings that are coming up. The second step would be to ask yourself, where are these thoughts and feelings coming from? Are they from that one direct experience? Or could they possibly have a root in your childhood, for example, or in your relationship with friends, with siblings, with your peers? When we sit with the emotions that may come up when we're feeling sentidas, we can start to decipher, what is it bringing up in us? What is it triggering? What are the buttons that are being pushed? Where is it coming from? And more importantly, what is at the root? What is the core issue? Because once you know what the core issue is, you can start taking steps to resolve those problems, to ease the tension, or to come up with some solutions to the conflict. As you are thinking about the core of the issue, the core of your emotions, where they are coming from, one thing that's really important for us to recognize is if this is coming from an old narrative. Now, in narrative therapy, we talk about how sometimes we give experiences meaning about who we are, meaning about the world. Is the world a safe place? Are relationships safe? Can we trust? And as we're making sense of the world, we are creating these narratives about different people, about different groups that we relate to, about who we are. And so sometimes in our experience as stepmothers, some of our experiences can be pretty intense. And sometimes it's intense joy. Sometimes it's intense anxiety, intense sadness, anger, and even rage at times. And so, as we have these experiences that trigger big emotions, one of the things that we can do is to start becoming aware of the narratives behind those big emotions and try to understand, is this particular situation with my stepchild or with my stepfamily confirming an old narrative? Is it confirming some meaning that I've given about the world, about relationships, about safety? Am I looking for evidence to confirm these narratives? Some of these narratives could also be about ourselves, like if we are unlovable, if we are unwanted, if we don't fit in, if we're outsiders. And especially for first gen parentified children, this is big. And so, in our experiences as stepmothers, sometimes, every once in a while, you might use that experience to confirm and to validate these narratives that might not make us feel too good about ourselves or who we are. Along those same lines, it could also be useful for us to think about, how do we rewrite those same narratives? How do we rewrite the story about ourselves and who we are in the world? What are some changes that we would like to implement, whether that's in how we talk to ourselves, how we talk to our stepchildren, in the way we go about, I don't know, disciplining or talking about important things with your stepchild? What are some ways that you re-envision who you are as a person, that you re-envision what you want for your family? What do you want your family to be like? What do you want your living situation to be like? What kind of vibe do you want to have in your house? And if it hasn't been a great one, how do you rewrite that? Because we have the ability to transform ourselves. We have the ability to rewrite, to change our lives with every breath. And so, as we are granted a breath, we are also granted the opportunity to change things up. And so, in becoming aware of the feelings that our experiences are bringing up, in becoming aware of what could be some old stories that are feeding specific narratives about who we are in the world or who we are with our stepchildren, we can also start thinking about, how do we shift those narratives? How do we shift those stories? How do we reinvent ourselves? And as a part of that, another step could also be identifying positive affirmations. So, learning to talk to ourselves with love, with care, being like, oh, mija, I love you. So, even incorporating that into your own, being able to speak to yourself in a loving, compassionate way, maybe hyping yourself up, reminding yourself of your strengths, of your skills, of what you bring to the table, your qualities, maybe things that you have been able to overcome, but just reminding yourself what a beautiful person that you are, how powerful or how resilient that you may be. There's a lot of power in that. And so, ahorita, since we've had Mother's Day, you know, if any of you are feeling some strong emotions, or maybe, you're having a series of experiences where you might feel a little disempowered or dismissed or whatnot, just know that these feelings, these emotions, these thoughts, they're all like teachers. They're all like signals, like little flags. I'm not going to call them either green flags or red flags, but these are all señales of things that we might need to work on, past experiences that we need to process, like a big old torta. So with that, step mamacitas, las voy a dejar. I hope that those steps helped. There's a lot of ways that we can process our experiences, whether that's with Mother's Day, everyday stepmotherhood, or when we are thinking about how we relate to our stepchildren. And so I hope you all have a lovely, wonderful rest of your day. I will catch you on the next one. Se me cuidan. Mwah. Thanks for tuning in to La Madrastra. If you've enjoyed what you heard in this episode, please make sure to subscribe, give the show a like, and follow on IG at Blatoli Wellness, link in the description. If you have any suggestions for future episodes or topics you would like addressed, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, please visit the podcast website at lmp.buzzsprout.com and leave a message. That's LMP as in La Madrastra Podcast. And remember, nobody is illegal on stolen land. Ciao, ciao.